Thanks, Hannes. And I will say a few words to introduce the panel, and then I will give the floor in turn to each of them. So as you have understood from the introduction of the context of Digital Humanism workshop, you may understand that education is an important element within this scenario. So the idea of this panel is to start the reflection on whether we need to change somehow the content of informatics education. And I have been telling within my community, I've been discussing with my colleagues since many, many years now, that probably we should prepare students for their future work by providing them the attitude of a medical doctor who has her feet well rooted in science and technology, but whose ultimate goal is to heal and ensure the well-being of people. And this does not imply to renounce to prepare them as engineers, which translate specification into systems that work according to the plan because they are based on science. But this implies that more and more of these systems are of an interdisciplinary nature, and therefore our students have to be educated, have to appreciate issues that go beyond traditional area of informatics. And this will be discussed within this panel, and this apply probably not only to higher education, to the students we have in our classrooms, but in general to school education and to education to every citizen. How can we prepare the everyday citizen to understand the impact of informatics in the world, how the digital technologies are changing the world, if they do not understand the science, the constraints, and their constraints and their effect. So the panel will debate this issue from 3 different viewpoints. And without further ado, I will now introduce Randy Connolly, which is professor in the Department of Mathematics and Computing at the Mount Royal University in Calgary, Canada, where he also teaches in the General Education Department. And he has a background both in computer science and in political science. Therefore, his research has oscillated between these 2 fields, and his teaching specialties are web development and technology and society studies. He has authored 3 textbooks used by thousands of students in over 100 universities worldwide. Earlier this year, Randy wrote a paper for communication of the ACM with a very stimulating title, which is Why Computing Belongs Within the Social Sciences. And this title and the content resonated with my view of informatics as medicine that I described earlier. So I found that these ideas and these approaches were highly in tune with the Digital Humanism Manifest, and therefore, together with his research interest in the social effects of computing, I think this makes him the perfect speaker to open this panel. So Randy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. All right, everything seems to be, oh, sorry, I forgot to share the screen. A blip already. There we go. Now this should be sharing. So I had to shorten the title a little bit, and as Enrico has indicated, I am going to be talking about why computing should be a social science. And I do have a background in both political science and computer science. I often talk about computer science because that's typically the term in North America, but I guess informatics is going to be a little more common a term in Europe. So let's get started. My apologies for speaking very fast, but here it goes. So I want to begin back in, this is a picture of Alan Greenspan, the chair of the Federal Reserve in the United States, back in 2008, when he was testifying before Congress in the immediate aftermath of the financial crisis. And really the high point, I think, in the proceedings was when he was pressed to admit that your view of the world, your ideology, it wasn't right. And Greenspan admitted, he said, absolutely, precisely. Well, fast forward 10 years to another sort of famous mea culpa moment in front of Congress. Mr. Zuckerberg, right, in 2018, In light of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, Russian interference in the election, he also admitted to wrong, right? But as far as mea culpas goes, Greenspan's was a lot more concise and insightful to the root of the problem. It wasn't the problem of users or license agreements or rogue developers. He recognized that the problem lay in a worldview that kind of worked until it didn't. What I found interesting was that in the immediate aftermath of the financial crisis, there were calls for reforms within university programs themselves. It was thought that the kind of unrealistic models and assumptions within economic departments and business schools were also partly responsible for the crisis. Well, I think it's time for us to have our own road to Damascus moment. It's time for us in computing to also kind of critically interrogate the worldview of academic computing. So let me give you the elevator pitch for the rest of the talk in a couple of slides. The well-publicized social ills of computing are not going to just disappear by simply adding in ethics instructions or code of conduct, right? The remedy, I think, to these problems facing computing don't so much lie in philosophy, but lie in the marketplace. They lie in the fields such as sociology, psychology, anthropology, and political science. Okay. Why is that the case? Well, it's because, as I'm going to argue, computing as a discipline is becoming progressively more and more entangled within the human and the social life world. Thus, computing as an academic discipline needs to move further and further away from kind of engineering-inspired curricular models and move towards and adopt the analytic lenses supplied by social sciences. Okay, so that's what I'm going to spend my remaining 12 minutes talking about. So I want to begin by talking about academic computing's worldview. Now, computing, like any academic discipline, has maybe somewhat arbitrary intellectual demarcations, right? But as a new field, it initially laid out a set of kind of markers, if you will, to distinguish it from mathematics and engineering. Perhaps the most important of these markers was computing's sort of unique disciplinary way of thinking, what by the 1990s was sometimes labeled as computational thinking. Within academia, computing and computational thinking has followed an expansionist arc since the 1990s. And indeed, by the end of the 1990s, you would see claims that kind of boiled down to something that looked like this, that computational thinking provides a methodologically superior set of techniques that can be applied universally and supply truth propositions that are kind of unblemished by past history or social institutions, by the human psychology or the antiquated theories that others used. Well, other disciplines, as part of that kind of narrative, have been continuously encouraged to embrace computational approaches. Well, as a political scientist partially, I was always amazed that the reverse was rarely advocated. And indeed, I think this triumphalist, almost quasi-colonizing mentality is at least partly to blame for computing's current fraught relationship with other societal actors. So instead of replacing social science approaches, I think academic computing would be immeasurably improved by supplementing its own methods and approaches with those of the social sciences. Okay, supplementing. So let's go on and take a look at what do I think of when I'm talking about the social sciences? Well, look, within the natural and engineering sciences, the predictability of its subjects can generally be assumed, and thus a single methodological approach for making knowledge claims is possible. But the human and social systems are much more complex and less predictable. And as a consequence, methodological and theoretical pluralism really characterizes the social sciences. This embrace of complexity is a key insight that we need to import into academic computing, I feel. As computing interacts more and more with the human and the social life world, we need to use the approaches and ideas that have already been established over the past century of social science research. So what I want to do is I want to talk about 3 recommendations that are in my paper, and we are going to talk about them for transforming computing education, because that's really my interest, is what can we do as educators to improve things. And first off, computing really needs to divest itself of its kind of colonizing mentality towards other disciplines, and to instead recognize that theoretic frameworks from outside computing have value and would indeed improve computing. Now, in the light of one of the most keen criticisms I received after publishing the article was people in HCI, and HCI is already there in a sense. It's time, but it's time for the rest of computing to catch up to HCI. So yeah. So take, for instance, I don't know, the subfield of data science, right? Data science has been really good at identifying patterns in heterogeneous data sets, right? Data science tells us that there's a few ducks here that have life preservers, but it doesn't really tell us why only this one duck has one. That is, to explain patterns and correlations, that requires social theory. It requires contextual knowledge, right? A better understanding of human psychology, social power, and the economic incentive structures in society may have allowed us to avoid some of the social technical problems we face today, right? Think about the lack of deep security measures in the internet, the initial internet protocols, right? I think it betrayed a kind of hopeful and naive understanding of human motivation held by the early pioneers of the internet. Our current legitimation crises facing democracies today is at least partly a consequence of the social fragmentation, which was enabled by digital platforms, right? Digital platforms created by programmers with a minimalist understanding of what new communication modalities can do to an unprepared audience. Consider as well the relatively newfound appreciation within AI research about how pre-existing human biases can pollute the training data used within machine learning, right? Well, perhaps a lot less surprise would have been encountered had those working with AI been required to take, say, a course in anthropology. For almost 50 years, the most introductory anthropological training has endeavored to instill a recognition that cultural differences and perceptions of otherness biases the observations of researchers. And yet in AI research, it's only a relatively recent thing to recognize this fact. Why? Well, I think it's partly because of an institutional blindness to the accumulated insights of really a century of social research. So for too long within computing, I think we've tended to instead rely on kind of pop culture theories about the inevitable technology-driven social progress that really painted an attractive and self-satisfied veneer over our work. Moving forward, we need to do better, right? We need to be willing to inform both our work and our thinking with the more nuanced, historically grounded, empirically supported, century-old research tradition of the social sciences. So the best way to achieve my first recommendation is my second one, right? Modestly reduce the number of computing courses in our programs in order to accommodate some mandatory social science courses. The official ACM and IEEE curricular recommendations need to do this as well. They need to acknowledge that computing graduates need to do more than just computing and mathematics courses. Well, they have, for instance, in the ACM recommendation, they recommend an ethics course, right? But this isn't enough. Our graduates' worldview must broaden. we must do so to recognize how computing is both impacting and being impacted by political, social, economic, and cultural institutions, right? And this means we need to do more than simply teach deontological versus utilitarian algorithms for ethical trolley problems. It's a good start, but it's too individualistic oriented. It's just a start, right? My third recommendation is we need to embrace multidisciplinarity through faculty hiring, right? Well, porous edges, I think, are better than sharp boundaries when it comes to broad and relatively new academic disciplines such as communications and computer science or informatics. And indeed, to take a metaphor from ecology, ecological edges are zones where ecosystems overlap. And interestingly, it's where biodiversity and biodensity are much higher. They're higher on the edges than in the central areas of any one ecosystem. There's a saying that there's more songbirds at the edge of forests than in the middle. That's what computing needs as an academic discipline. We need to participate in the rich academic biodiversity where computing overlaps with other disciplines. To help reach these rich edges, we need to hire more instructors or professors or whatever your institute calls these people into computing departments who are specialists in the human and social side of computing. So, oh, actually, I just wanted to say one more thing. We don't need to limit ourselves to computer science PhDs here. There are communications, sociology, law, psychology, anthropology, and other PhDs out there whose dissertation topics are clearly computing related or even computational in an approach. We need to consider bringing them into our computer science faculty. So in conclusion, computing professionals and academics have helped create something truly awesome over the past half century. And awesome is truly the appropriate word, especially if we're cognizant of its etymological heritage. The word awesome, in fact, is derived from the ancient Greek word dianon. And this word captures better the full dimensions of computing's awesomeness. To be dianon is to be both wondrous and terrifying at the same time. In Sophocles' Antigone, the famous Ode to Man says that man is the most dianon creature, both wondrous and terrifying. Within computing, we've tended to focus only on the wondrous, and we've kind of either ignored the terrifying or delegated its reporting to other disciplines. We must be willing to face this dianon reality of the future. We need to embrace our responsibility as computing professionals to change and renew our curriculum and the worldview that it propagates. We've been given this task by history, and this is how the future is going to judge us. Thank you. This is the paper that Enrico was kind enough to mention. Whew, 30 seconds to spare.
Yeah, okay. So thanks, Randy. Really thanks for this very wonderful and provocative introduction. I mean, some of the things you said made me shake a little bit, even if I share some of your approach. But okay, we will see in the discussion. Now it's time to introduce the second speaker, Johanna Seibt, which is professor for philosophy at Aarhus University in Denmark and director of the research unit for robophilosophy, which is also a conference series, and integrative social robotics, an approach she has developed to organize research and development processes in social robotics so as to include humanities expertise, with the goal of creating culturally sustainable and responsible social robotics application. Convinced that social technologies are best developed in interdisciplinary teams, Johanna is currently exploring how the insight of the integrative social robotics paradigm can be translated into new educational approaches that can provide future professional informatics and other social science and humanities disciplines with those competencies needed to participate in these interdisciplinary developer teams. She therefore is the perfect speaker to go deeper in the topic of our panel. Johanna, the floor is yours.
So I hope that everything is visible. Thank you very much for the invitation. I am going to follow up on pretty much everything that Randy has said, but with a focus on a dimension of computing that few computer scientists as such think right now immediately about, namely the embodied, the use of AI in embodiments and robotic embodiments. So we have been since 2014 run the so-called RoboPhilosophy conference series in order to alert our colleagues in the humanities in particular that there are new and very pressing tasks for humanities scholars. So what I want to go through with you in the next 15 minutes is a very simple line of thought. First claim is that the technologies we produce for our immediate future may have profound negative effects on aspects of our social worlds that are particularly valuable. We see at the moment that social media have rather unexpected effects on very basic elements of our social world. We talk about currently an erosion of the very foundations of democracy, having to do with the concept of truth and fact, and also political deliberation. My next point will be that engineers, as they are currently educated, are not equipped to fulfill these new responsibilities that are arising with the new type of technologies that we are creating. And then I will quickly present how we are currently in Aarhus here try to approach the problem as I will set it out. And my conclusion will be that we need to create permeable educations. You will see in a moment why I'm not going to advocate educations where multiple competences, cross competences are literally created in the course of the education, but rather where students begin their education with a view to becoming members of an interdisciplinary team. Okay, let us start out. One can say the characteristic human way of interacting with the world is to change changes based on counterfactual imagination. And that's the essence of technology, and it's also the essence of art, one might claim. Each tech normally we were put on here for the purpose of human survival and comfort, but during the last decades we have begun something else. Each age has its signature technology, and it appears that the signature technology for the next decades of the 21st century will be automation. You probably all have seen the projections for the profound changes that this will create within our workplace. There have been some anticipations of the socio-political repercussions that this might have. But we tend at the moment to conceive of automation on the foil of cultural imaginaries that sort of look like that picture. We are still fully in control and we have technology at our fingertips. The world is something that we regiment and control. We get from economic institutes like McKinsey the reassuring message. I don't know what kind of data went into that statement, that the ability of technology to disrupt is nothing new and its influence is overwhelmingly positive. So policymakers take the bearing from statements like that with, I would say, rather dubious historical sources. What we are dealing with in the future, what we will be dealing with, comes out in the following pictures. Look at these kinds of artifacts and look at pictures like these displaying what appears to be genuine emotional involvement of people with machines that are programmed to behave as if they are social agents. In fact, Sintra Basile, who is often presented as the protagonist of social robotics, formulated the overarching design strategy of social robotics as follows. She said, in reference to her robot Kismet, people will treat Kismet as if it were a socially aware creature with thoughts, intents, desires, and feelings. Believability is the goal, realism is not necessary. So here we have a whole industry creating a future industry, an industry that has begun to pick up, but certainly is largely in the future, although the robotics market is projected to take off rather rapidly now. Creating artifacts that are designed to affect what one could call the social brain, that is the part of our brain that does pre-conscious processing of socially relevant information. So as has been during the past decade or so investigated, robots indeed can affect low-level mechanisms that are at the medium level, and certainly also those brain regions that incline us to ascribe an intentional stance, sort of to take the intentional stance, as this is put, that is to ascribe intentions and feelings, beliefs, intentions, and feelings to these machines. Interestingly, human-robot interaction research, a discipline that exists for about 14 years now, has studied the extent to which people are willing to not only take the intentional stance, but also immediately to consider the new type of social agent, or as if social agent they're interacting with as moral agents. So here you have a picture from an experiment by Peter Kahn from 2012, where humans quite readily lied to another human being in order to protect a robot they had interacted with before for 15 minutes. Sherry Turkle wrote a beautiful book in 2012 with she anticipates the possibly profound negative effects of the increased and ubiquitous use of social agents that sort of are friends that we make, in a sense of making friends that we haven't tried out before, where we control the extent of variation in reactions. And given on her, based on her research, she is shocked by the fact that the performance of connections seems in many cases connection enough. So she talks about the time right now, these first decades of the 21st century, to be the robotic moment, that moment in sociocultural history where we need to contemplate how we will receive social robots, since that will also tell us something about who we are right now, but in particular also who we are willing to become. So engineers are facing, this is the next line now, to the extent that they are engaged in particular in social robotics, where AI techniques are used in order to create the illusions, but partly also the competences of a social agent. They are moving into a completely new type of space of responsibility. A picture like this, I think, conveys in itself which cultures are clashing here. The simulation of social agency is tightly connected with the simulation of emotional connectedness, and that in turn has a tight linkage to moral standing of an artifact as either moral agent or moral patient. So what we find and need to work against is what I call the competence illusion. Even though engineers working in social robotics and computer scientists have the best of intentions, there is a misunderstanding about how competence as a participant translates into research competence, and that in turn into competence in evaluating what is still responsible and otherwise irresponsible development of technology. Social actions are actions in a symbolic space, and that simple message is something that we in our research unit have been trying for the last 6 years to convey. But it is a message that is difficult to convey. I said that engineers believe often that their normative competence and their agentive competence is enough to develop applications that comply with our sociocultural norms and with our ethical norms included. At the same time, the current investigative tools that social roboticists use right now are not sufficiently discriminative. The more we create technology that interferes with the space of human social cultural agency directly as presenting itself as a social agent, the more we need the expertise of the humanities. So what we have been engaged with is developing a type of new paradigm for, on the one hand, research, but also the development of social robotics applications where we integrate many different disciplines in order to create in the research design and development process culturally in order to create a development process that ends up with a culturally sustainable product. In particular, we argue that integrating humanities expertise at the very beginning is a matter of scientific rationality, since in this way we can create more precise description and evaluations of human-robot interactions. On the other hand, it's also a matter of practical rationality, because social robotics, but also many other applications using AI are at the moment caught in the Collingridge dilemma. We create technologies, the consequences of which we can only access at a time when it is too late to extract these technologies from society. So we need also the normative competences of the humanities in order to build in some anticipatory internal regulation by value-driven design.
Sorry, Johanna, 2 minutes to go.
2 minutes to go. So in order to resolve this gridlock, our program of integrative social robotics suggests a re-visualization here, bringing in essence, the humanities at the very early in the process, and in particular having value deliberations infusing the entire development process. What does that mean for educations? Well, interestingly, according to our experiences, on the one hand, the principles that we have developed for how to create culturally sustainable social robotics applications can be exported to other types of technology. But we also, I think, can argue that students, given that the competences that are needed are rich, we cannot build, we've really tried that, we cannot build educations that reduce the competences in each discipline. So all that we can try to do is create interfaces so that students become competent members of interdisciplinary teams, but they need to be fully trained within the methodologies of their own discipline. And it needs a different mindset and interfaces, but not completely new educations that would, in particular, lower the methodological standards of each of the involved disciplines. Thank you.
Thanks, Johanna, for being perfectly on time and for this description of a scenario that reminds me the science fiction books I was reading when I was younger. Indeed, it's becoming a reality, and the issue of social robotics is really important. So it's now the time to introduce the third speaker, Lorella Zanardo, who is an activist for human rights and social justice. She is the author of the project Face Manifesto, a 10-point manifesto aiming at stimulating emotional and physical awareness about the importance of our faces in the current digital society. In a previous life, she held senior executive positions in a major international organization and currently is a member of the WIN Advisory Board, an international organization of female professionals based in Oslo. Her current focus is the education of teenagers and citizens in general on the use of images and media, which in the digital society play a role more important than ever as an essential tool to reclaim active citizenship. With her broader focus on education for all citizens, I think she is the perfect closure for this panel. Lorella, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Enrico, and good afternoon to everybody. Being media educator and media watcher, together with my team, we analyze every week hundreds of images, and therefore we have realized that the human face is undergoing profound transformations. That's why we felt the urgency to create a volto manifesto, a face manifesto, a manifesto about our face. We will share with you our reflections. From the heavy use of photo retouching on social networks and in advertising to influencers whose digital appearance is very similar to real individuals, and to androids with anthropomorphic features and with artificial intelligence, as the one you showed us before. All these phenomena have brought to everyone's private and social life daily encounters with artificial faces. So we have asked ourselves, which are the repercussions of the ongoing transformation on interpersonal relationship and society? How these artificial faces are influencing young people who often do not realize anymore the difference between a real face with its humanity and a fake one. Just a second, because we had another video. Yes. Which are the consequences on our lives when we meet, when we encounter these faces? Will the disappearance of the face of the old people, we only see young people, also in the images you showed us, we only saw young faces, young android faces or young human faces. And will the disappearance of the face of the old people be without consequences for our communities? We seldom see an android or a digital human with an old face. In a transformation of such magnitude, other important elements come into play. One is the ancient dream of creating fellow human beings, capable of emulating us and perhaps of offering a continuation to our species, giving life to intelligent beings and potentially able of consciousness and emotion. Another element is the contemporary standard of beauty. And I invite you to follow my suggestion that this is a very important issue, perhaps the most important, marked by strong stereotyped tendencies that push towards the homologation of individual features. In a present time dominated by digital relationships based on images, deviating from these canons can lead to exclusion, loneliness, and fear. So this one is an interesting experiment done by the photographer John Rankin. Rankin asked a panel of adolescents, both boys and girls, have you seen, to modify their faces as they liked with Photoshop. So this is the result. As you can see, nearly everybody, both girls and boys, modified their face in a very similar way. So very thin face, big cheekbones, thin nose, very thin chin, big eyes like in the manga. So at the end of the experiment, Rankin asked to these boys and girls, so you prefer yourself in the way you modified yourself? And strange enough, the answer was no. I would like to stay as I am, but I have to prepare a face in order to be accepted on the social media. And the social media accept me only if I have a face like this, which means a unique face, which summarizes all the faces. So the global scale of the transformation that the face is undergoing, driven by practices such as videographics, robotics, plastic surgery. We never mentioned plastic surgery, but that's another very important modification of the face. And photo retouching requires that we ask ourselves some pressing questions. What do such artificial presences mean for our interpersonal relationships and self-perception? Sorry, just a second. What are the repercussions of the face alteration on our lives? Being it not just any part of the body, but our face is the very place that makes us unique, the part that allows us to be a person, a human being. I invite you to consider together, to make now a short experiment. I, myself, Lorella, I am presenting to you now through my face. I'm not here without a face. I'm here with my face, and I enter a relationship with you through a screen, but presenting my face. If I come closer to the camera, you can see better my features, perhaps also the wrinkles, the creases, the eyelids. And from my face, you can deduce my age, if I'm tired, perhaps the life I have had, and perhaps how do I feel. Would your perception alter if I had undergone heavy plastic surgery? Would your perception alter if I were a digital human in front of you? Would your perception be more empathic if I would be in Vienna, in present, one in front of the other, seeing each other and be in contact with each other? What does the experience of the uncanny valley teaches us? An experience that in Japan, as in Japan have proved, produces a sense of anxiety, of Unheimlichkeit, what it's not home, in those who are faced with faces that are very similar to human ones, but they are not human, such as android, videographic works, and faces that have undergone heavy plastic surgery. So what is at stake is not the free choice of individual behaviors and modifications, but the fact that such complex experiences are taking place without a widespread awareness and a shared social discussions. There is an urgent need for a renewed dialogue between aesthetics and ethics, because face, especially face, is the place where aesthetic and ethic meet. We firmly believe that we should declare face as a world heritage before it is too late. If tonight, when you go home, you could find the wonderful movie of Pierpaolo Pasolini, Il Vangelo secondo Matteo, the Gospel by San Matteo, and you would stay in front of the screen, removing the audio, and you would see for 2 hours only faces. It was shot about more than 50 years ago, and it's already changed. It has already changed a lot. If Pierpaolo Pasolini was here today, it would be impossible for him to do the same film. Already our faces look very much similar to each other. So it's high time we declare the human face a world heritage. Therefore, it's not a matter of issued judgments, but of starting an urgent reflection in light of a human face being the place where our sense of existence arises. By proposing the face as a heritage of humanity, our Voto Manifesto aims to invite everyone to join a shared collective dialogue on the uniqueness of the human face, on the digital and physical transformation that are taking place, and on the unique role that the face holds for human relationship and the ethics of society. If we destroy face, we should start to think of what will happen to ethics in society.
Lorella, yeah, sorry, can you arrive to a conclusion?
Yes,
so that we give...
2 minutes, I have finished. The project consists of some instruments. we have workshops for students of secondary school where we propose discussion on these points. It's in Italian, but you can read Humanity and Beyond. Is the intelligent artificial, being machine, being human, and the face as a world heritage. And then we have a video essay that will be presented on the web starting January 21st, that invites the viewer to directly face both artificially created and actually existing faces. And then we have a 10-point manifesto that you will find everything on our blog site, the Volto Manifesto, Face Manifesto, in order to offer food for thought on the key issue. You see some points are very provocative, no? Perfection is boring, and we discuss it in schools. Our face is unique. Think about the vulnerability of face, as James Hillman wrote. So we strongly believe that the uniqueness of human face should be protected. And I think the objective of our team is to reach digital humanism as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lorella. Your talk has shown us how really important are these issues, because they are already affecting our society. So I thank again all the speakers, and we can start the discussion. And if you have question, please raise your hand. We have a moderator that will try to regulate the traffic. And I don't know if I've seen somebody has written some very long message in the chat. I don't know if this is a question or not, Gunther. But if there is anybody else that has some question, then please raise your hand or just open the microphone and start speaking.
Enrico, I have questions to Lorella, because I found it very interesting what you have shown, and I think it's somehow also disturbing. And it's also in line with the discussion of Stuart Russell, who said we should omit robots with some human interface, human faces and things like that. But the question behind is that, isn't IT or the robot uncovering a social psychological bias we have? Isn't not the issue the IT system, but it's more the societal view on beauty and how we should look like? So we should not blame maybe the IT systems, but we should also discuss what our societal biases and points of views.
Yes, we are not criticizing the IT system, not at all, but as usual, as we are doing since 12 years, we want to raise awareness, because what we discover, especially in schools, that young people, adolescents, they are not able to recognize, for instance, real human face and digital human. And so we have the impression that we are going towards a huge change without really realizing what's happening. So we are not criticizing really IT. What we feel that it's lacking something like I'm so happy that today to be here with you, because I think it's so important to exchange opinions. As you have seen, we put together digital humans and faces which have undergone heavy plastic surgery. We are not criticizing people who do it. Of course, everybody, in our opinion, can do with their face and body whatever they wish. But it's true that when you are confronted to a person or to an android or a person who has undergone a heavy plastic surgery, you feel uncomfortable. It's a sort of uncanny valley sensation. So it's true that it's together, it's an IT problem, but also a social problem. Yes, I agree.
Okay, and I have seen there is a question also from Viola Schiaffonati. Yes, Viola.
Good afternoon. It's a question to Randy, and it's a question on why philosophy cannot provide the analytical lenses that you mentioned. I mean, ethics and philosophy are more than the trolley problem and all that stuff.
Yeah, great question. I'm not against philosophy. I mean, my PhD dissertation advisor was a philosopher, so I mean, I'm not against it. I guess what I'm trying to get at, sort of somewhat provocatively, was that in the North American computer science education context, there's been a kind of almost hand washing that, okay, we'll teach the students some ethics and be done with it and get back to the hard problems of, you know, writing compilers, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess the problem I feel like with that is that it's often been kind of almost algorithmically taught in some ways, with a real focus on, you know, what I might think of, I sometimes think of as sort of ethical algorithms, right? You know, let's teach them, you know, these four, you know, ethical stances. Great. Now let's just apply them to a couple of issues. Boom, done. We've done our social duty. And so I don't think that's really enough. Like it's nothing against philosophy. It's more that I feel like that's an insufficient education. I don't know if that makes any sense, Viola.
Thank you.
Okay, Johanna, you want to say something?
Yes, I wanted to pick up a comment that I found here in the chat by Sally Wyatt. I think it is very important that we, as we concretely consider how to address the problems that we are in agreement about, that we do so first on the basis of the research discussion in HRI, for instance, or HCI, because these are interdisciplinary areas or multidisciplinary areas that already answer some of the questions that we've been raising here. Second, that we do so on the basis of concrete experiences with research. What we found, we came as philosophers, not as ethicists, but I'm an ontologist, as phenomenologists, ontologists, as epistemologists, people skilled in theoretical philosophy. We came to the area and discovered some of these problems here. And arrogant as philosophers are, thought that we could simply supply certain orientational tools and conceptual tools and so on. And in the course of doing research, developing applications, but also developing educational programs, we really humbled ourselves. And we realized that it is only on the basis of a mixed method approach with multiple methods that we can attack the problem. So there is so much contextuality in the development of culturally sustainable applications that I believe we need to set all biases about what a discipline can do and not do. We need to set that aside and work from concrete problems. Start with some sample. Start with an application and try to develop something together with the engineers in a multidisciplinary setting. And on the basis of that experience, we then need to develop some concrete proposals of how to translate that into educations. And I think this is what Sally is doing. And I thought my question actually back was whether she thought that the humanities had something to offer that the social sciences did not have to offer.
May I answer that?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, there are building works going on in the house next door, so there's a lot of background noise, for which my apologies. And I completely agree. I mean, I work in a faculty of social sciences and humanities, and when we developed this program, we wanted to include both, not just the social sciences, because I think you're absolutely right that the humanities have a lot to offer, not only philosophy, but also history. And I think that came up in some of the discussions as well, that there, these technologies didn't emerge, fall from outer space. I mean, they emerged as a result of a long, both a kind of technical history, but also kind of social history that means that we have the technologies that we do. And I think there's a lot to be learned from also thinking about how people kind of coped with the introduction of, the printing press, the telegraph, television, many of the same promises that we had that, back then we see again with digital technology. So what can we learn from that? And I mean, our aim in this program isn't to produce programmers. I mean, our computer science friends can do that, but really people to kind of do the translation and mediation work between the kind of two. But my kind of ultimate aim is that some of those things disappear. I mean, I really liked what Randy was saying about trying to teach computer scientists more about philosophy and history and ethics and social science as well. My own experience of trying to have those discussions, I think Randy mentioned this, is, any moment not spent learning to code is a waste of a moment. And having, it's been really difficult to try and kind of say, well, look, we could also offer to your students more kind of discussions about, why do some technologies fail? There's a lot to be learned from that. And as a final remark, I mean, one of the things we're trying to do in this program, but, we're only had our second cohort, so it's still early days, is to try and set up kind of joint discussions between the computer science and data science colleagues and students with our own students to kind of try and test those things out. So, yeah, but it's interesting. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other, because I think the question of technology with society, no single discipline has an answer to this. This is very much something where we need input from all of the disciplines. None of us has a monopoly on wisdom here.
Enrico, I think Peter.
Yes. Yeah, Peter.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you very much for this very inspiring keynotes. I'm a bit puzzled, and I would like to ask a question probably to Randy. I couldn't agree more with you that it's necessary for us computer scientists to appreciate the methodologies from social sciences as well as philosophy, apparently. But I was a bit puzzled about your remark that HCI has already made this step, and you would like to become the whole of informatics like HCI. Maybe this was a misunderstanding, but I'm wondering what HCI is basically, for me, sort of an interface between computer science and social sciences and philosophy, which would be one model. Another model has been proposed by Johanna, saying, okay, we need interdisciplinary teams and everybody in the core science. I would follow rather an orthogonal model, like something like you have to focus on hardcore informatics, but orthogonally stay a human in the sense of thinking about your existence, and in this sense becoming a philosopher much broader than ethics as well. I think really this is a question of philosophical anthropology. In fact, this is the key field for this discussion. So I'm a bit puzzled between these different models I see here, and I'm wondering whether we can agree on one or whether we have to stay with different of them, and that's in fact a feature and not a bug. So,
yeah, Randy?
Great question. I'm kind of still, the HCI thing comment was just a reflection on just a number of comments that I had gotten that from people practicing within that area, saying, we're already making, we've always been a kind of an interface with these other disciplines. You don't need to tell us. You need to, convince the rest of the or the non-HCI computing people to make that step. Yeah, I don't know. Like I wanted to make a comment just about Johanna's permeable education. I really love that idea. I think it's a fantastic way of thinking about interfaces to other disciplines. It seems maybe a bit more suitable for faculty and research teams. I guess I'm maybe a little more, I don't know if it helps with individual students per se. It's, I guess I was maybe a little more interested in the micro level of that, but I think it's fantastic. This idea of, not individuals with mixed competencies, but interdisciplinary teams. That being said, I think that there's a real tendency to overstate how much technical knowledge we need to teach within a computer science degree, right? My teaching specialty is in web development. I've got a variety of books on that. It's what the vast majority of our CS graduates end up doing, and yet it's not part of any formal of anywhere in the formal ACM model curriculum. It's like a little optional topic that if you want to cover that, go ahead, but we don't need to. So if we think that we can produce CS graduates without covering what arguably is the most important skill they actually need, there's probably other things that we can probably slim down. I think there is room within our curriculum, computing curriculums, to broaden out to other fields. Peter, I'm not sure if I answered your question. It was a great question. I hope I have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks, Randy. Unfortunately, in spite of the highly interesting discussion, times is not relenting and is clocking as usual. So we should go to the coffee break in 1 minute. Randy, I read that you had a comment to Johanna, or you already covered it.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. That's okay. So I think we will have to deepen this question more in the future. And we have a DIGHUM series where we focus each time on a single topic. I think we could go deeper into this question in the future, because I still have some question in my mind. I guess also other people have the same. So I close this panel, thanking again the three speakers for your wonderful presentation that popped a lot of questions in our brain. That is what a good speaker has to do. Thanks also to everybody that attended this session. Now we go in the coffee break.